Well, Zach, this has been a big week for AI with, I think, a few interesting things happening. First of all, you actually have access to iOS 18.1, which I'm very excited to dig into and hear about all of the nerdy stuff that you've been up to. But Meta and Microsoft also announced earnings this week, and I thought there were some really interesting announcements and insights into AI progression as part of that as well.
I remember just a few months ago the hype around this and being so excited to test this out, and we finally have access to there's still missing features. It's not fully complete yet, but if I'm being honest, if I had to rate on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give it a 5 to 6 out of 10 based on what they have today. It's something that I don't find myself using, but like when the system automatically brings AI, whether it's into iMessage like I told you last night, where you text me and then when I go to respond, there's the AI message glowing in the new color, or the email summaries are cool too. But you also have the writing tools, which can do the summary, listing the key points, proofreading as well. So I've played with it a little bit. It is, again, a beta, so not all the features are there, but I'm impressed, but I'm not super impressed compared to what they previewed. Now, when the ChatGPT integration comes later this year, some of that, did they call it Genmoji, the generative AI?
Genmoji, yeah. Great naming convention for sure, right?
That will be interesting as well. But right now, the thing I'm most excited about is the new Siri UI UX, a little rainbow when you talk. Like, look at that. But
that is pretty cool.
Another cool thing, though, too, is they changed the Siri voice, and it sounds to me like an XM radio like announcer, DJ kind of thing. It's
interesting.
It's taking time to get used to, but like I said, right now I'm not too impressed, but you can see in this early beta the direction Apple is going.
Mm. So talk to me a little bit about the new Siri piece, because I know you have not always been a huge fan of how Siri has operated in the past. Do you feel like there's improvements now with conversations where it's smarter than it was before? I see you shaking
No,
your head,
I don't.
like, no.
And this is, I was on Reddit just verifying, this as well. I'm like, there's no way it's just me, but doing things like, hey, what's the weather today? It brings up like a little weather widget. Then you can be like, what's the weather going to be in 6 hours from now? And it brings up the same widget with like the current, like it's still doing the same behavior. So I'm not completely sure how Apple's integrated there. One thing I do want to talk about too a little bit though is, with this being in beta now, developers now have access to the resources to integrate this into their apps. I showed you how you can, or I think I may have mentioned this to you at least, but you can have AI, Apple Intelligence, learn from different apps. So that's going to become a thing. I did prompt Siri once, and I'm careful not to set off my HomePod here. I did prompt Siri once to say, hey, ask this app to do X, Y, Z, and it said, hey, this just hasn't been updated for that yet. I was like, okay, that's totally fine. But I think one of the integrations I'm most interested in is that ChatGPT. That is the feature I think I will use the most. I think the email summary is cool too. Like I showed you that email from GoPro where right at the top, I didn't have to read the email. The summary said, hey, there's a discount through the summer sale to this date. And that was it. I didn't scroll. And I do think that's going to be interesting for marketers, right? How do we optimize our email content, knowing that in Apple's case, and I expect we will see this across, in the reality, I think most inboxes will do this in the future, but if AI is going to be summarizing emails, how do we tell AI what the key points of the email are so it summarizes it correctly? So there's going to be some optimizing content there, but like I said, additional features would be coming out here, and I think right now the plan is to launch 18.1 this fall, so kind of in that October timeframe. But I'm not super impressed, but I do see the direction Apple is going, and it might be one of those things too where I just need to remind myself to use Apple Intelligence more often, whether it's responding to text messages or selecting text and summarizing things like that. But 6 out of 10. I see where they're going, but right now I'm still using that Chat GPT button mapped on my 15 Pro Max.
Yeah, and that's a good point about understanding that you're going to need to. It's going to need to be a change in just how you use your phone on a day-to-day basis and start to integrate some of these things into your day-to-day activities. I know we're going to talk about Microsoft a little bit more later as it relates to Copilot, but that was something that took me a little while. I'm so used to using apps and the Microsoft set of apps a singular way. So it has taken me a while to start to migrate my usage of those applications to integrate AI into more of the activities. And I'm sure Apple Intelligence is going to be the same way.
Yeah, can I give you one feature that I am honestly impressed by?
Please.
And this might be like the photographer in me. I'm one of those people, I love taking photos, making videos, things like that. But the Photos app on iOS 18.1, phenomenal, because they built AI into it so you can generate movies and slideshows. This search in it too is more contextually aware too. So I could be like, hey, show me photos of me hiking a mountain totally out of breath. And it does just that. It's very impressive what they've done with the Photos app. But like I said, Apple Intelligence has been out for, today's Friday. It's been out for 3 days or 4 days, right? I mentioned that 6 out of 10. That might seem harsh, but like I said, there's a lot more that Apple's going to release, and getting this into the hands of developers like myself, obviously testing the beta on my primary phone here. I think we're going to see some significant improvements here over the next few months, especially as we come to that initial release. But it has me thinking too, what apps will utilize Apple Intelligence, right? Because what I would love to do, being in broadband, if my Wi-Fi is slow, I would love to ask Siri, careful what I say so I don't trigger my HomePod, but hey, why is my Wi-Fi slow? And then have that route back to my app, process that information, and then come back. I think that would be a fantastic use case of Apple Intelligence because, again, Apple is going to be putting this into the millions of subscribers, anyone with a 15 Pro, 15 Pro Max, and the MacBooks and so on. But this is going to be a very big deployment of Apple Intelligence.
Yeah, it's going to be widely deployed for sure. I know we've talked about this previously, and there obviously is an upgrade cycle for people who want to use this. I don't have a 15 or sooner, obviously, because the 16 isn't even out yet. So perhaps I'll be one of the ones that upgrade so I can get all this fancy AI
I'll sell
technology.
You my 15 Pro Max. No, I'll get this.
Yeah, exactly.
But speaking of Apple, Gabe, I feel like every big company had their earnings announcements this week. So
it was a busy week for earnings, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. What's new with Apple?
So on the Apple side, it's as you said, they announced earnings for the last quarter, and a couple of things that I thought were really interesting in the earnings release. There's a lot of discussion that people are buying too many services, whether they're streaming services or just services in general. But one of the things that really jumped out to me with Apple is that their services business is insane. They drove $24 billion of revenue in services in the last quarter. That's almost $100 billion annual run rate. So this nobody wants to buy services, or we are buying too many services business, I think is a bit of a misnomer. When you're looking at Apple, who's driving nearly $100 billion a year in services business, it's just an insane revenue line item for them now.
And I want to break that down because, two comments here. Number one, this services revenue did not always exist for Apple. This is relatively new for them. So they built this foundation, and now on top of that, a $24 billion business unit is huge. And one of the things I always geek about this, and probably similar to you, Gabe, I have a spreadsheet with Apple's past earnings on it, broken down by product category. And obviously, iPhone's number one. I think Q2 was around $39 billion. Services, you just mentioned, number two here at $24 billion. And then everything else combined, iPads, Mac, wearables, accessories, everything combined is only $22 billion. So that services revenue is still, number two, but again, bigger than every other business unit Apple has combined. And I think that is very telling, again, how much revenue they've generated in services.
Yeah, you told me that number and that it was the bigger than everything else combined, and I kind of dropped my jaw. And the other one, the other part of that that's wild too is, and I joked to you that it's probably a 90% gross margin business, and you replied that it's actually a 71% gross margin business.
To be correct.
Yeah. It's still crazy high though, and way higher than their hardware business. Their hardware business is more in the 30s and 40s, depending on the hardware itself. But so they've got a $24 billion quarter business at a 71% gross margin. And this is where, I think any marketer can look at this and realize, oh my gosh, there's this massive opportunity to sell services. But also, there's a massive opportunity to upsell and cross-sell customers into other solutions. And you mentioned this just a moment ago, Zach. Services is a relatively new business for Apple. They did not have this for a very long time, and they've realized how profitable it can be, how big of a business opportunity exists out there, and because they know so much about their existing customers and how to market to them very effectively, they have been able to drive this massive increase in services business. And this is something that I think more businesses, just in general, outside of Apple, need to be able to understand. What do I know about my existing subscriber base so that I can sell them more things and sell them better things? Because that is probably the best way that you can drive profit into your business is by upselling and cross-selling services into your existing subscribers.
And Apple doesn't break it down, I think, this far, but you know what service or even business unit that I would be most interested in learning about is Apple TV. And the reason I say that is I've never paid for that managed service, but I always get the free trial. And I've been reading that they're trying to be more cognizant of their spend as it relates to original content. But again, I've never paid for that. Personally, I wouldn't. But I've always gotten these free trials, and that's the one business unit of Apple that I'm very curious as to, within that services $25 billion, what is the Apple TV generating? Otherwise, like on my phone, I have Apple Arcade because it's included with my phone plan. I pay for iCloud storage too, so there's a couple of services there.
Yeah.
We've talked in the past, Gabe, on this podcast about the Apple family plans, and I'm forgetting the names of of those now, but I do think Apple has
Apple One, right?
Apple One,
is what they call it. Yeah.
Yes, I do think they have an attractive offer there, especially with all their added services go. Not to throw TV completely under the bus, but I think Apple's doing a fantastic job with, here's the hardware that you buy from us. Now that you have it, what else can I sell you?
Exactly. And what else can I sell you at a crazy high profit margin that is going to, and as I sell more of it, that profit margin just grows exponentially because the fixed cost of delivering that is next to nothing. You talked about the iCloud storage. I'm sure that iCloud storage is a huge portion of that services business. I would venture a guess it's probably at least half because so many people who do have an iPhone subscribe to that. I don't know.
Let's be honest here. The default iCloud storage is 5 gigs. My phone's 256 gigs. Like, something doesn't add up. Like, I could take... Yeah, I like to take video, like I said. I could fill that 5 gigs up with a weekend, if not a day of, hiking
100%.
and video.
And I've talked about that.
They know what they're doing there.
They 100% know what they're doing. And I've talked about it. I think I've made this joke before on the podcast about my wife, who I call a digital hoarder because she refuses to delete any pictures of my kids. And she never will delete pictures of our kids. So, she's there taking advantage of her desire to have all of these hundreds and thousands of pictures and videos of our kids. And because they do take up a ton of space, they're able to sell her all these additional storage capabilities. And again, at a crazy high margin.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that's also one of the benefits of the cloud. So, I joked about my iPhone 15 and how I'd get a new one this fall. I don't plan on it, but if I was to, this cloud that Apple has, knowing my phone is backed up, my photos are backed up. In your wife's case, if anything happens, you've got that full library of photos backed up that, in 200 years should still exist, right? But I think the whole cloud infrastructure that Apple has is, I feel like that's where I'm most interested in seeing what they do next with.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And there is, to your point, there is a huge customer experience component and positive customer experience component that's driven from that. A few years ago, we were on vacation and she dropped her phone in the ocean. and it just completely fried the phone. This was like pre-waterproof phones.
Is that a problem back in the day?
It was a problem back in the day. And we'd literally been on vacation for like a half an hour, and she dropped her phone in the ocean. But thankfully, everything up to that point was backed up. And when we got home, we got her a new phone and downloaded everything from the cloud. And we lost maybe a day worth of pictures. Like, it wasn't a huge deal. Yeah, so there is definitely value for the customer there, for sure.
Absolutely. And Gabe, let's talk, again, I think in a couple months we'll follow up on Apple Intelligence.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
This could even be like, Apple does weekly or every 2 weeks. I don't know the cadence here, but we'll keep everyone up to date on what's new with iOS 18.1. The last comment I want to make is iOS 18 isn't even out yet, and Apple's already testing 18.1. I think they have done this maybe a couple times in the past, again, testing that .1 beta before the general release of the main software. So I think that's interesting as well. These AI tools have been out now, Gabe, since 2023, January 2022, December. I can't remember, how long it's been. Apple is quite obviously, quite clearly behind a little bit, but like I said, I'm impressed with what they're doing. I just want to see where they go next.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, and kind of furthering this discussion and shifting gears a little bit to our friends over at Meta and what they're doing from an AI perspective, very different business model than what Apple is doing with Apple Intelligence. Meta has basically open sourced everything with their Llama models and all of that, which they came out with a new model this week that has more languages and more capabilities from a coding perspective. But we wanted to talk about some of the enhancements that they've made from an advertising perspective, Zach, because that's the bit that I think is really interesting. And I wanted to read a quote here from the earnings release. And normally I'm not a huge fan of reading quotes, but I thought this one was particularly interesting. So Mark Zuckerberg, there's a direct quote from how Meta is building AI into their ads business. So he says, over the long term, advertisers will basically just be able to tell us a business objective and a budget, and we're going to do the rest for them. We're going to get there incrementally over time, but I think this is going to be a very big deal. I agree, Mark. I think that's a pretty big deal.
That's a very big deal. But the thing with Meta Ads Manager, there's several components I'm thinking of this, and especially with I see this a lot of times with small businesses as well. Whether it's creating the graphic itself, right? What best practices do I follow? If I'm hypothetically new to this, how do I do this? If I know nothing about graphic design or creating content, how do I go about this? And then combine that with, how do I build an ad? Who's my audience? Who am I trying to target? I have a $500 budget for this, campaign. How do I optimize that? I think there's so many questions that could be answered there through, a little bit of AI. And I'm excited to see how Facebook does this. I am also excited to see, the split test, right? How does, hypothetically this AI ad do compared to the ad targeting that I've built myself? I think that's going to be fascinating as well. Gabe, if we're being honest, Advantage Plus, we have not seen, overwhelmingly positive results from that yet.
Agreed. And I think, as he said, it's going to take them time to get there. So, and you and I have talked about Advantage Plus in the past, Zach, and I think we're both a little dubious that that's something that you should, as a marketer, just kind of wash your hands of and hand everything over to Advantage Plus. I think there's a lot of risk in that. But as part of the earnings release, Meta did share that their Advantage Plus campaigns, and to flip the thing there, their Advantage Plus campaigns are building automation and tools, and they're actually driving a 22% return on ad spend or a boost over non-Advantage Plus campaigns, at least for their US advertisers. So they're starting to talk pretty aggressively about the benefits that Advantage Plus is driving broadly across all of the companies that are running Advantage Plus ads versus other types of ads on the platform. So it's interesting to start to see some of these results coming out. Now I think there's questions about, what does the budget look like? How much are people spending? Those sorts of things. Is it only going to be effective for people who are spending over $50,000 a day because that's where the AI is going to be most effective. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. But they are starting to share some of these statistics about exactly what you're talking about. The fact that Advantage Plus is starting to drive potentially better outcomes versus manual campaigns.
Yeah, but I feel like we have rather specific use cases, right? Like when we do targeting here through Meta, we have very specific audiences, right? So that's kind of, number one thing to think about. The number two is, me, the placements, right? Like this is where I do think with what Facebook has been talking about here, I think they could actually use AI to optimize the content itself. Everything's sized correctly. Everything looks great. The copy's great. I think they can get there. But again, optimizing placements. And Gabe, you and I are big fans of diving into those pivot tables and seeing the results of ads based on different placements. Knowing that Meta already has access to this, again, I think AI can come in and help them, or help anyone, optimize content based on even past results. And I think the last
100%.
thing I want to touch on here, specific to Meta Ads Manager, is and I kind of alluded to this, the process of creating an ad can be complex, right? Like you could go to Facebook, you could boost a post and be done, but that's not necessarily a best practice. There are use cases when that's okay. But if you go into Meta Ads Manager, you've got 3 panes of customizing your ad, your audience, the creative. You've got a lot of options and a lot of settings you can do. Ad scheduling, again, the budget we talked about, the audience, is it in a specific area? With us, Gabe, again, very targeted to specific addresses. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that can go wrong, especially if you're new to building Meta ads. I would love to come in and just say, this is what I want to do. Help me do it.
Yes. Yeah. Go help me.
I guess not even help me. Do it for me.
Yeah. Yes. Do it for me. Well, and there were 2 other kind of tools that are part of the ads platform that they talked about. One is called Lattice, which is the tool that ranks and allocates ad placements. And that one, again, Zach, you and I have talked about this a lot, making sure that your creative is appropriate for the placement of where it's going. And I totally agree with you that there's a lot of opportunity to have AI help there. But using that Lattice tool that they talk about to allocate where ad placements are going and drive better results. And Meta's stated that functionality is getting better and better over time. And then a new one that they talked about, which I hadn't heard this term before, but they called it flexible format. And it's specifically for Advantage Plus ads. And what it does is it's supposed to analyze your ad placements and content, and then Meta determines the best place to put those ads that's going to drive the highest return on ad spend. So it's kind of an extension of Advantage Plus, but it's actually looking at the specific ads that you have uploaded, the copy, the creative, all of that, and then saying, oh, okay, well, based on everything that you've put in here, we believe that the best return on ad spend is going to be to put this into Instagram feed. Therefore, we're just going to pump it all in there. So those enhancements, I think, start to be really interesting in doing what you're talking about. Just do it for me, right? Mm-hmm. Drive the outcome that I want to drive. I want to spend this amount of money, and this is what I want to get out of it. Here you go, Meta. Go knock yourself out.
Gabe, I feel like you and I are, I don't want to say we're experts, but we're fairly experienced with Meta Ads Manager, or even Meta platform as a whole. So I think our comfort level is, hey, tell me what you want to do, and I'll build out the ad and, the audience, everything myself. But again, like I mentioned, if you're new to this, I think this is going to be huge. And like I said, also, I'm one of those people that I like to test things. I like to break things. I absolutely want to do, ad 1 with Meta AI, whatever they come up with, ad 2 with my own targeting, and see what those results look like. But I think this is all very impressive. I think, as a reminder, Meta has so much data that I believe they could build a model that does all of this and executes very well.
I agree, and I feel like I do feel like we're pretty comfortable around this, but I also think we have to be honest about the fact that, in theory, they have, obviously, I shouldn't say even in theory, obviously they have way more data and way more insight than we will ever have in our brains.
Absolutely.
So it should be much more effective, but it is difficult to just hand an advertising campaign over completely to AI. And that was what I think a lot of the negative feedback around Mark Zuckerberg's comment was in some of the articles that I read. People going like, "Hey man, there's art and science here. You know, marketing isn't always going to be isn't just science. There's an art component to this as well. And I'm not comfortable just handing everything over to you just because you have better data." So that's going to be the balance that people have to go through and that marketers have to work through. But to your point, testing it is really the only true way to validate, is the knowledge that I have about my customer base unique, or is it better for me to turn this stuff over to Meta and just let them run with it?
I'm very interested to see where they go with this. Meta, they've had their reputation, right, good or bad, but I think what they're doing here is impressive. Again, I want to get my hands on it and test it myself, but I think this will be a huge leap forward for them with advertising. Yeah.
Last comment before we move on to the Microsoft piece of this. But Zach, I didn't put this in the outline, but did you see that Facebook daily active users actually grew on like traditional Facebook, especially in younger groups? Did you see that in the release?
No, but that surprises me. Do you have the number off the top of your head?
Because I don't. I forget the number off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I'll see if I can find it and share it with you. Share it with everybody at some point. But what they were saying is that WhatsApp and and Facebook Marketplace specifically were two things that were really driving people back into Facebook proper. And really Facebook Marketplace was the big thing. So because even younger people like Marketplace, it was driving them back into that traditional Facebook app much more than what we've seen over the past few years, where everybody thinks that it's just a bunch of boomers on Facebook.
2 comments on that, because one of them just happened 20 minutes ago, but I was on Instagram and I pulled up my stories, and one of my friends, they're shopping for a car and they're using Facebook Marketplace, and one of the things they found was a pirate ship boat, and they thought, well, we have to have that. But I just thought that was funny. But to be honest with you, I don't use Facebook much. I maybe post some photos once a year. I don't think I've posted since April 2023. But I do go on occasionally and go to Marketplace. My siblings do this as well. My parents do this, but See,
there you go. You're part of the problem.
I am. I do appreciate Marketplace. It's just so much better than eBay. You can quote me on that, but I've sold stuff on Marketplace. It's a great way to have that, quick garage sale. But I absolutely, my social media usage, I should actually pull up my phone and look, but I've absolutely stopped using Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter. I don't use that one as much. Still a heavy Instagram user, and then Facebook again. I'm not active on Facebook to Meta's results, but I think it's interesting that they're actually growing. But
yeah,
I think,
I thought it was really interesting that they were growing as well.
What I would love to see now is what happens to Threads, because that is an app that's on my phone that every time I open it, it's usually by accident, but I would love to know more about how Threads is going.
Oh, they talked about that, and it was growing crazy amounts. I was honestly stunned by the number, and I'm sorry I don't have it off the top of my head, but it was at least double the monthly active users, people using Threads than it was last year. And I think it might have even been triple, Zach. It was a huge increase of people using Threads, which surprised me because I downloaded it when it first came out, and honestly, I probably haven't looked at it in 6 months, maybe longer.
It's the content on Threads is interesting, because I like the pages I follow. Like, this could be a me problem, but like they're not as busy, but like I feel like the conversation is more genuine and more conversational, if I can say
versus
that.
The hellhole that is X.
Yeah, X is it's chaos. So the problem I have with X is, well, one, like on the feed, like the replies, in the past it was like based off like recency or people replying. Now it's verified accounts and then everyone else. So like when you go to click on a reply, let's be honest, for the most part it's spam, and then you have to keep scrolling. Like, the user experience is not what it used to be. Also, I've gotten I think 5 new followers this week, none of which are real, but that's a conversation for a different day.
So speaking of AI stuff and responses and whatnot, I had to laugh, Zach, this week because one of our coworkers very kindly put a post out on LinkedIn and about how he was enjoying the podcast, and tagged a bunch of people in it, which I really appreciated. So thank you, Jeff. That was very nice. But the part that I was cracking up about, and I sent it to both you and him, was like clearly AI response that got thrown in there, and I was like, Oh, Jeff, you've made the big time, buddy. You've got AI people responding, AI responses in your LinkedIn feed. Well done. Like, I feel like that's the threshold for whether you've made it or not on LinkedIn.
That's impressive too, to have an AI driven LinkedIn account. Like, I feel like there's way too much effort into creating a LinkedIn account. But
it was hysterical. It was just the comment was. It was clear. It was so clearly an AI comment. It was just hilarious.
And Gabe,
the whole thing made me laugh.
This is the last thing I'll mention before I move to Microsoft Copilot. On ChatGPT, a few months ago we had an episode about like the GPT 4.0. So this week I was using AI to just testing out some things, and I hit my limit, and it's like, okay, we're sending you back to the 3 model, the GPT 3 model, and it was funny because you could like if I hid that notification that said we're putting you back on this model, you could very clearly see something in the conversation change. Like you could pretty much tell how the responses were different between 4.0 and 3. But the last thing I want to say is advanced voice on the ChatGPT app started rolling out this week. So Gabe, we'll have to check to see if we have access to that and follow up with everyone there to see what's new with that. And again, we talked about that on a previous episode, talked about what's new, but I think we might have access to that now as well.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I have been using some of the multimodal stuff in ChatGPT to, analyze pictures and things like that. So it's the multimodal stuff is a trip, man. Well, let's shift gears to our last kind of main topic here, Zach, which is our friends over at Microsoft, who were also out with earnings this week. And what we wanted to talk about as it relates to Microsoft, obviously massive company, I think technically the biggest company in the world, but specifically thinking about the Copilot piece of this and what that means for AI and how all of us are using it on a day-to-day basis. The couple of things that really jumped out to me when I was looking through the earnings release as they were talking about Copilot usage. So Microsoft also owns a company called GitHub, or purchased a company called GitHub, which is primarily for coding and things like that. And that's really where they started to roll out a lot of the Copilot features first. And user growth there has been explosive. So they've got 77,000 users on this GitHub Copilot solution. That's a 180% increase year over year. They're also driving a $2 billion annual revenue run rate just from that part of the company alone. So when I look at Microsoft, I think they're probably one of the companies that's monetized AI the best so far by taking Copilot, integrating it into their solutions, and then selling it as an upsell or an upgrade to their existing customers who are already on Microsoft Office 365, who are already GitHub users, so on and so forth. And that, I think, is, again, a fantastic way as a business to grow your revenue really profitably by selling additional services to people that you're already selling to. And they're really starting to see some significant revenue come into their financial statements from these solutions.
I bought I don't know if I told you about this one, Gabe. I bought a new laptop a couple weeks ago, and sure enough, there's a Copilot button built into Windows.
Is there? You did not tell me that.
I'm a Mac user, so a lot of Windows features are new to me. But right next to the clock, there is a Copilot button, and you can basically engage with your entire Windows 11 system through Copilot. And again, the Mac user in me was impressed by that. But outside of testing it, I haven't used it. But I will say, at my job, I use Copilot a lot, and I will say the Copilot feature I am most impressed with is when you use a Teams meeting and have Copilot enabled. Oh my gosh, I used to be, very questioning with Teams, not totally sold on it, but with this Copilot integration, when I see that Teams meeting come through, I'm like, all right, we're gonna have Copilot, we're gonna be good to go. But that's where I'm using it the most. I always thought it would be like Excel or PowerPoint, even Outlook, but Teams, that's my Copilot place.
I'm with you, and I had a similar experience, not just with meetings, but also summarizing threads. I was on vacation a couple of weeks ago, and I came back to obviously an insane number of Teams messages. And a lot of them, as you know, Zach, are threads with many, many people in them who are creating, there's lots of comments that happen on a day-to-day basis. And having to go back through and read all of those is a friggin' nightmare when you come back from vacation. Just like catching up on email can be a nightmare too. Well, AI to the rescue for that one, because I was able to, just summarize some of those long conversations in very succinct ways. Just tell me what happened over the last 7 days, and it'll give you a great summary. And then if you want to drill into a specific topic, you can click on that and go into more detail. So I'm with you. It is something that I have started to use just about every day. I mean, maybe not every single day, but pretty close. And when it has that contextual information too about the jobs that we do on a day-to-day basis, it's really impressive. And the number of Copilot users has exploded really for Microsoft in general as well. They talked about it in the earnings release, but users have doubled quarter over quarter. And the number that really jumped out to me is 10,000 seat customers doubled quarter over quarter. So they're going to very large organizations, big multinational organizations most likely, and selling upgrades to them to have Copilot integrated across tens of thousands of employees Microsoft Office 365 day-to-day activities. So that, I think that's going to be a real interesting numbers to continue to look at. You could start to see if they're talking about how much revenue is actually being driven from that business specifically. It just seems like such a massive revenue growth opportunity for them.
Gabe, I've got a question for you, and I'm going to prompt this by saying I haven't asked you this one yet, but it's a comment we've made on the podcast in the past. But it's really about AI being the most integrated, AI being the most useful when it's integrated into tools that we use on a daily basis. So we've talked about Copilot and how we've used that in our day-to-day lives in the past, but thinking back to Apple Intelligence, the apps on your phone, or your day-to-day life, where do you see AI having the biggest impact on your personal life?
100% in my phone. I don't think there's any question about that, because it is something that I use every single day. Just like Office 365 is something that I use mostly 5 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. But when AI is integrated into the tools that we use on a daily basis, that is where we will see the explosion in growth. And that's why I'm so bullish about Apple Intelligence being broadly available, and it kind of kickstarting, I think, a second phase of adoption around AI, because it is in something that God knows we stare at these screens way too frequently, right? And we are on our phones constantly for hours a day. When AI and when Apple Intelligence specifically is built in there, I think that's really where you're going to start to see mass adoption. And you talked about it earlier, Genmoji. I think that's probably the thing that's going to get people most excited when they can create those little, personalized
those
emojis.
Excel emojis.
Oh my gosh, dude, people are going to lose their minds for that. But it's going to be the gateway drug into the rest of this stuff.
I agree. 100% I agree with you. AI on my phone. I will take it a step further, and I'll say, for me, I see communication apps being the most impacted. Well, obviously, because everyone communicates, but like I mentioned to you, being able to have those pre-built responses that are contextually aware of not only what you're talking about in the thread, but the Apple example of, you have your mom is flying in at this time and you're tracking her flight on this app, like bringing all this information in, you have this email. Like, I think that's going to be very powerful. I'm excited to see developers and see what they end up doing with Apple Intelligence as well. But for me, I think communication apps. I also think Apple understanding how people use their phones, and this is where the AI privacy comes into play a little bit too, but understanding how people use their phones, how people use apps, could play in Apple Intelligence. I gave this example to a colleague today, and I said, I like to be conscious of when I run the air conditioning in my house. I don't run it 24/7. I'm the only one that lives here, so it's not necessary. But I do like to go to bed cold, so I'll typically run it from like 9 to midnight or so, right? And the way I do that now is I've got an Echo Bee, so I basically set the temperatures, and it kicks on and off for the most part automatically. But I think with Apple Intelligence, it could say, hey, this is a habit we've noticed. This is the location of the phone. This is what we know about you and how you interact with our products. Let's customize that experience. So I think we're going to see some fantastic things. I've said it before. It's 5 days old now, so I'm very excited to see where we go next. But again, impressed so far, but a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah, well, and I think what was so interesting about this week specifically, Zach, and why we wanted to do this episode, is that a lot of this stuff feels a lot more real than it did even a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago. And we're starting to see this actually roll out as a beta for Apple. Microsoft is talking about this mass adoption that they're seeing with Copilot. Meta is talking about how they're doing all of these things to integrate it into their ads placements, as well as other tools that you're seeing, or other pieces of their solutions as well. So all of this stuff is starting to feel a lot more real. For a long time, it felt like science experiments, like we were just sort of
playing with it like a playground.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. We were just sort of messing around with it. But now all of a sudden, we're starting to actually see some real use cases, and that's the part that gets me really excited about this.
I agree, Gabe. And I think there's more to come. I think this is a conversation we will be continuing.
Yeah, we're going to have to revisit this a lot. I mean, this is already a conversation that we've probably had 2 or 3 times. And every time we have it, there's more and more information around how we're going to use this.
Awesome. Well, thank you for tuning into Buffering. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to give us a follow on your favorite podcast app and to share it with your friends and colleagues, just like Jeff. And for more insights and updates, be sure to connect with Gabe and I on LinkedIn and visit our podcast blog at bit.ly/buffering podcast for even more content and resources.